The Seoul skyline glittered beneath the private jet's windows as Kang Ji-hoon gazed down at the city he'd left 5 years ago. His reflection in the glass showed a man who had aged beyond his 32 years, sharp cheekbones more pronounced, dark eyes holding depths of experience that came with building a global empire. The boy who had fled Seoul in desperation was gone, replaced by someone the international business world both feared and respected. His assistant, Park Min-jun, shuffled through documents beside him. The board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 9. Your father expects a full report on the European expansion. Ji-hoon nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. 5 years of running freeze, of building walls around his heart with steel and concrete acquisitions, and yet the thought of returning to Seoul still made his chest tighten with familiar anxiety. Sir, there's one more thing. Min-jun hesitated. The employee wellness initiative your father approved. The board has selected an art therapy to partner with. The director is highly recommended. Fine, handle the details. Actually, sir, your father specifically requested that you oversee this project personally. He believes it's important for the company's image that the CEO be directly involved in employee mental health initiatives. Ji-hoon's jaw clenched. His father's manipulations never ceased, even after all these years. Kang chairman knew exactly why his son had left Seoul, and this felt like another test, another way to prove that Ji-hoon had truly overcome his past weaknesses. The plane touched down at Incheon International Airport as dawn broke over the Han River. Ji-hoon straightened his tie and gathered his composure. He had conquered markets across 3 continents, survived hostile takeovers, and built an empire worth billions. Surely he could handle returning to the city where he'd left his heart behind. But as the car drove through familiar streets toward Gangnam, Ji-hoon couldn't shake the feeling that some battles were harder to win than others. Chapter 2. The Antidote. 5 years earlier, the small café near Hongik University had been Ji-hoon's secret refuge. Hidden away from the corporate towers and family expectations, it was the only place where he could breathe without the weight of the Kang legacy crushing his chest. He'd discovered it during one of his countless sleepless nights, when anxiety had driven him from his penthouse to wander Seoul's quiet streets. The café stayed open late, catering to art students and insomniacs like himself. That's where he first saw her. Soo-jin had been hunched over textbooks, her long black hair falling like a curtain around her face as she studied. Even exhausted from her double shifts, café work during the day, art therapy classes at night, she radiated a warmth that drew him like a moth to flame. "You're here again," she'd observed on his 5th visit, looking up from her psychology textbook with curious eyes. "Same table, same order, Americano, no sugar. Is that a problem?" he'd asked, genuinely concerned he was disturbing her study space. "Not at all, I just wondered if you ever sleep." The simple question had hit him like a physical blow. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the nightmares and racing thoughts that plagued him when he closed his eyes. "Sometimes," he'd lied. Soo-jin had studied his face with the perceptive gaze of someone training to heal minds. "You know, I'm studying art therapy. It's amazing what creating something with your hands can do for an overactive mind." That conversation had been the beginning of everything. She became his antidote, the only person who could quiet the chaos in his head. In her presence, the crushing weight of expectations lifted. When she smiled, the knots in his chest loosened. When she laughed at his awkward attempts at humor, he remembered what it felt like to be human, rather than just a corporate machine. For 8 months, she had been his secret salvation, until the day he realized that loving her was the most selfish thing he'd ever done. Chapter 3. The Clinic. The Healing Arts Therapy Clinic occupied the top 2 floors of a modern building in Itaewon, its glass walls offering panoramic views of Seoul's bustling streets. Dr. Soo-jin stood in her office, reviewing patient files before her morning session, when her assistant knocked on the door. "Dr. Min, there's someone here from Kang Corporation about the partnership proposal." Soo-jin's pen froze mid-sentence. She'd known this day would come eventually. Seoul's business world was smaller than people realized, and the Kang name was impossible to avoid, but she'd hoped for more time to prepare herself emotionally. "Send them to conference room A. I'll be there in 5 minutes." She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass as she steadied her breathing. 5 years of therapy training had taught her to manage her emotional responses, but some wounds ran deeper than professional techniques could reach. The woman who looked back at her from the window's reflection was different from the girl who used to serve coffee and dream of helping. Success had given her confidence, designer clothes, and the respect of her peers, but it had also taught her to guard her heart more. Her clinic had become one of Seoul's most respected mental health facilities, specializing in treating high-stress professionals and trauma survivors. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd built her career on helping others process the very kind of abandonment she'd experienced herself. When she entered the conference room, she expected to see a mid-level executive or HR representative. Instead, she found herself face to face with the man who had called her his antidote and then disappeared without a trace. Kang Ji-hoon sat at the head of the conference table, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his posture radiating the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful. But his eyes, those same dark eyes that had once looked at her like she was his salvation, now held a carefully controlled emptiness that made her chest ache with recognition. "Hello, Soo-jin," he said quietly. "It's been a long time." Chapter 4. Professional Distance. Soo-jin's training kicked in before her emotions could betray her. She moved to the opposite end of the conference table with measured steps, her expression professionally neutral despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. "Mr. Kang," she said, her voice steady. "I wasn't expecting the CEO to handle partnership negotiations personally. I make it a point to oversee projects that matter to me." His gaze never left her face, searching for cracks in her composed facade. "And employee mental health matters to you now?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, carrying just enough edge to reveal that her professional mask wasn't as perfect as she'd hoped. Ji-hoon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It always has." Soo-jin opened the folder in front of her, grateful for something to focus on, besides the way he looked exactly the same, yet completely different. Success had sharpened his features, added weight to his presence, but underneath she could still see traces of the anxious young man who used to find peace in her small café. "The proposal outlines a comprehensive wellness program for your employees," she began, falling back on familiar professional territory. "Art therapy sessions, stress management workshops, and individual counseling service. The goal is to create a supportive environment that acknowledges the mental health challenges inherent in high-pressure corporate culture." "Comprehensive," Ji-hoon repeated, and she heard something like admiration in his voice. "You've built something impressive here." "I had good motivation." The words carried weight they both understood. For a moment, the professional veneer cracked, and she saw a flash of the old Ji-hoon, vulnerable, regretful, achingly familiar. Then it was gone, replaced by the controlled expression of a man who had learned to hide his emotions behind corporate armor. "The board has approved the partnership," he said, "but I have one condition." Soo-jin's stomach dropped, though she kept her expression neutral. "Which is? I want to participate in the program myself, as a client, not just an observer." The request hit her like a physical blow. After 5 years of silence, he wanted her to be his therapist? "I don't think that's appropriate," she managed. "Why not? You're the best at what you do, and I think we both know I could use the help." Chapter 5. Unspoken History. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, heavy with 5 years of unspoken words and unanswered questions. Soo-jin studied Ji-hoon's face, looking for the motivation behind his request. Was this genuine need, or another manipulation from a man who had already proven he could disappear without warning? "Mr. Kang, I think it would be more appropriate for you to work with one of my colleagues. Dr. Park specializes in executive stress management, and Dr. Kim has extensive experience with—" "I don't want to work with your colleagues." His voice carried a quiet intensity that made her breath catch. "I want to work with you. That's not how professional therapy works. Personal history creates conflicts of interest. Does it? Or does it create understanding?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Soo-jin's carefully constructed professional boundaries feel suddenly fragile. She thought of all the late nights she'd spent studying, driven by the need to understand why people left, why they stayed, why love sometimes wasn't enough to heal the deepest wound. "You disappeared," she said quietly, abandoning pretense. "For 5 years. No explanation, no goodbye. Just gone." Ji-hoon's composure cracked slightly, revealing a glimpse of pain that matched her own. "I know. Do you? Because from where I sat, it looked like I was just another business transaction you decided to terminate." "You were never that." The words came out rougher than he'd intended. "You were your antidote," she finished, the phrase bitter on her tongue. "Until I wasn't. You still are." The admission hung between them like a confession, raw and honest, in a way that reminded her of the man she'd fallen in love with in that small café. But 5 years had taught her that love and trust were different currencies, and she'd learned to be more careful with both. "I'll consider your request," she said finally, "but I need time to think about it." "How much time?" "A week." Ji-hoon nodded, standing with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to boardroom negotiations. "I'll wait for your decision." As he moved toward the door, Soo-jin found herself speaking again. "Ji-hoon." He turned back, and for a moment he looked like the lost young man who used to find peace in her presence. "Why now? Why come back?" His answer was so quiet she almost missed it. "Because I never really left." Chapter 6. The Weight of Success. Ji-hoon's penthouse apartment in Gangnam was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Han River, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and art pieces that had been selected by professional consultants rather than personal preference. It was beautiful, impressive, and utterly soulless. He stood at the window with a glass of whiskey he wouldn't drink, watching the city lights blur together as his mind replayed every moment of seeing Soo-jin again. She'd changed, grown into her confidence, developed the kind of professional poise that came with success and recognition. But underneath the polished exterior, he'd caught glimpses of the woman who used to laugh at his terrible jokes and fall asleep against his shoulder while studying. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent 5 years building an empire to prove he was worthy of, only to realize that success without her felt hollow. Every acquisition, every merger, every triumph had been measured against the memory of her smile, and all of them had come up short. His phone buzzed with messages from his assistant about tomorrow's schedule, but Ji-hoon ignored them. Instead, he found himself thinking about the last night they'd spent together, before everything fell apart. She'd been working on a painting for her final project, something abstract and beautiful that captured the feeling of finding peace after chaos. He'd watched her work, marveling at the way her hands moved with such certainty, creating something meaningful from nothing but color and canvas. "What do you see when you look at it?" she'd asked, stepping back to examine her. "Hope," he'd answered without thinking. "I see hope." She'd smiled then, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face and made him believe that maybe, despite everything, he could be the kind of man who deserved that kind of light in his life. 3 days later, his father had shown him the photographs. Images of Soo-jin leaving her apartment, walking to class, sitting in the café where the message had been clear. The Kang family's enemies would use anyone close to Ji-hoon as leverage, and a poor art student with no protection would be an easy target. "You have a choice," his father had said. "End it now, or watch her become collateral damage in wars she doesn't even exist." Chapter 7. The Decision. Soo-jin spent the week avoiding her office whenever possible, knowing that the space now carried the weight of Ji-hoon's presence. Instead, she threw herself into patient sessions, finding solace in helping others navigate their emotional landscape while her own remained in turmoil. Her best friend and business partner, Dr. Lee Yuna, finally cornered her on Friday afternoon with 2 cups of coffee and a determined expression. "Okay, enough," Yuna said, settling into the chair across from Soo-jin's desk. "You've been acting like a ghost all week. What happened in that meeting with Kang Corporation?" Soo-jin accepted the coffee gratefully, using the warmth of the cup to ground herself. "It's complicated. It's him, isn't it? The one you never talk about but who's clearly the reason you haven't dated anyone seriously in 5 years." The accuracy of the observation made Soo-jin wince. Yuna had always been perceptive, but this felt uncomfortably close to the truth. "He wants to be a client," Soo-jin said finally. "And that's a problem because I was in love with, because he left without explanation, because seeing him again feels like reopening a wound that never properly healed." Yuna was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the clinical detachment of someone trained to analyze human behavior. "What does your gut tell you?" "That it's a terrible idea." "And your heart?" Soo-jin closed her eyes, remembering the way Ji-hoon had looked when he said she was still his antidote. Vulnerable, hopeful, and carrying a weight that seemed heavier than when she'd known him. "My heart thinks maybe he needs help more than I need to protect myself." "Is your answer then?" "Yuna, it's not that simple. Professional ethics, personal history, the potential for what? For healing? For closure? For finally getting the answers you've been carrying around for 5 years?" Soo-jin opened her eyes to find her friend watching her with gentle understanding. "Sometime, Yuna, the universe gives us second chances disguised as professional obligations. Maybe this isn't about him needing therapy. Maybe it's about both of you to finish something that was left incomplete." That evening, Soo-jin sat in her apartment with her phone in her hands, Ji-hoon's business card on the coffee table in front of her. The numbers seemed to mock her, representing a choice between safety and possibility. Finally, she dialed. "I'll do it," she said when he answered. "But we do this my way, with my rules. Whatever you need. First session is Monday at 10. Don't be late." "I won't be." After she hung up, Soo-jin sat in the quiet of her apartment and wondered if she'd just made the best or worst decision of her professional life. Chapter 8. The first session. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, Seoul's autumn weather matching Soo-jin's mood as she prepared for Ji-hoon's session. She'd chosen her most professional outfit, a navy blazer and pencil skirt that served as armor against the vulnerability she felt creeping in around the edges of her composure. Her office had been carefully arranged to promote calm and openness. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, and several of her own paintings on the walls, abstract pieces that invited interpretation without demanding it. She'd learned that the environment could be as therapeutic as the conversation itself. Ji-hoon arrived precisely at 10, dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But beneath the expensive tailoring, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself as if expecting an attack. "Please, sit wherever you're comfortable," she said, gesturing to the seating area away from her desk. He chose the chair facing the window, and she noticed how his eyes immediately went to the view of the city below. Always the strategist. Even in therapy. "How does this work?" he asked. And she heard an echo of uncertainty that reminded her of the young man who used to ask her about art therapy technique. "We talk. You tell me what's troubling you, and I help you process it." She settled into the chair across from him, maintaining professional distance. "What brought you here, Ji-hoon?" The use of his first name seemed to surprise him. For a moment, his corporate mask slipped, revealing something raw and unguarded. "I don't sleep," he said quietly. "Haven't slept properly in 5 years. The anxiety it's gotten worse since I came back to Seoul." "Tell me about the anxiety." "It's like drowning while everyone around you breathes normally. Like carrying a weight that gets heavier every day but that no one else can see." His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. "I built everything I thought I wanted, but none of it matters if I can't find peace." "And when did you last feel peaceful?" The question hung in the air between them, and she saw the exact moment he realized what his answer would. 5 years ago, he said, meeting her eyes. "With you." Soo-jin felt her professional boundaries waver, but she forced herself to stay in therapist mode. "What changed 5 years ago?" "I made a choice. The wrong choice." "What choice?" Ji-hoon was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I chose to leave the only person who ever made me feel human." Chapter 9. Revelations. The sessions became a routine over the following weeks. Every Monday and Thursday at 10, Ji-hoon would arrive at her office carrying the weight of his empire and leave an hour later, looking slightly less burdened. Slowly, carefully, Soo-jin began to piece together the story of why he'd... "My father showed me photographs," he said during their 4th session, his voice hollow with remembered pain. "Pictures of you going about your daily life, leaving your apartment, walking to class, sitting in our café. He said the family had enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use you against me." Soo-jin felt something cold settle in her stomach. "So? You left to protect me." "I left because I was a coward," Ji-hoon corrected. "Because I couldn't figure out how to keep you safe and keep you at the same time." "Did you ever think to ask me what I wanted?" "Every day. But I was 27, and drowning in responsibilities I never asked for. My father had just had his first heart attack. The company was facing a hostile takeover, and I was barely keeping my head above water. The thought of dragging you into that world. So you made the decision for both of us." "Yes." The admission came out like a confession, and I've regretted it every day since. Soo-jin set down her pen, abandoning the pretense of clinical notes. "Do you know what the worst part was? Not the leaving, but the not knowing. I spent months wondering what I'd done wrong, what I could have said or done differently. You did nothing wrong. You were perfect." "I wasn't perfect, Ji-hoon. I was just me. And apparently that wasn't enough to fight for." The words hit him like physical blows, and she watched him absorb the impact with the same stoic expression he probably wore in boardroom negotiations. "You're right," he said finally. "I should have fought for us, but you didn't." "No, I didn't." The honesty in his admission was both devastating and oddly healing. For 5 years, she'd carried the weight of unanswered questions, and while the answers hurt, they also provided a kind of closure she hadn't realized she needed. "Where do we go from here?" she asked. "I don't know. I came back to Seoul thinking I could somehow make things right, but I'm starting to realize that some mistakes can't be undone." "Maybe not undone," Soo-jin said carefully, "but maybe understood, forgiven." Ji-hoon looked up at her with something like hope in his eyes. "Do you think that's possible?" "I think," she said, "that's what we're here to find out." Chapter 10. Breaking Boundaries. It happened during their 7th session, when Ji-hoon was describing a panic attack he'd had during a board meeting the previous week. His breathing became shallow as he relived the experience, and Soo-jin watched him spiral into the same anxiety that had once driven him to her café in the middle of the night. Without thinking, she moved from her chair to sit beside him on the couch, her hand finding his in a gesture that was pure instinct rather than professional technique. "Breathe," she said softly, her thumb tracing circles on his palm the way she used to when in for 4, hold for 4, out for... Ji-hoon's breathing gradually steadied, but he didn't let go of her. When he finally looked at her, the careful distance they'd maintained for weeks crumbled in an instant. "I missed you," he whispered. "God, Soo-jin, I missed you so much it felt like dying." "Ji-hoon, I know this complicates everything. I know I have no right to ask for anything after what I did. But being here with you, even like this, it's the first time I've felt alive in 5 years." Soo-jin felt her professional resolve wavering. The man beside her wasn't the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms and built empires. He was the broken young man who had once found peace in her presence, and her heart responded to his vulnerability the same way it always had. "This can't happen," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why not?" "Because you're my client. Because you left me once already. Because I've spent 5 years learning how to live without you." "Have you? Really?" His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "Because I've spent 5 years trying to forget you, and I can't. You're in everything I do, every decision I make. You're the voice in my head that tells me when I'm being an ass, the memory that makes me want to be better than I am." Soo-jin closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every professional instinct screaming at her to pull away. "This is exactly why I shouldn't have agreed to treat you. Maybe you're not treating me. Maybe we're just finding our way back to each other." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with the same expression he'd worn the night he first told her he loved her. Vulnerable, hopeful, and completely open. "I can't do this again," she whispered. "I can't let you back in just to watch you leave." "Then don't let me leave." Chapter 11. The Truth Unveiled. The kiss that followed was inevitable. 5 years of separation and longing condensed into a single moment of connection that shattered every boundary Soo-jin had carefully constructed. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, and the professional distance she'd worked so hard to maintain lay in ruins around them. "We can't," she said, but her hands were still fisted in his shirt, holding him close. "We already did. Ji-hoon, I need to tell you something." The words came out in a rush, driven by the sudden certainty that if they were going to do this, if they were going to try again, it had to be built on complete honesty. Something in her tone made him pull back, studying her face with growing concern. "What is it?" Soo-jin took a shaky breath, gathering courage for the confession she'd been carrying for 5 years. "When you left, I was pregnant." The words hit Ji-hoon like a physical blow. She watched the color drain from his face, saw his hands tremble as the implications sank in. "Pregnant," he repeated, his voice hollow. "I found out 2 weeks after you disappeared. I tried to call you, but your number was disconnected. I went to your apartment, but the doorman said you'd moved out without leaving a forwarding address." "Oh God." Ji-hoon's hands came up to cover his face. "Soo-jin, I'm so sorry. I never knew. If I had known." "I lost the baby," she continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "At 12 weeks. The stress, the heartbreak. The doctor said sometimes these things just happen, but I always wondered if—" "No." Ji-hoon's hands found hers, gripping them tightly. "No, don't you dare blame yourself for that. If anyone's to blame, it's me. I should have been there. You should have trusted me enough to let me make my own choices about the risks I was willing to take." The truth of it hung between them, raw and painful. Ji-hoon had left to protect her, but in doing so, he'd abandoned her when she needed him most. "I would have come back," he said desperately. "If I had known, I would have come back immediately. But you didn't know, because you left without giving me a way to reach you. I thought I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself from having to choose between me and your family's expectations." The accusation hit its mark, and Ji-hoon flinched as if she'd struck him. But he didn't deny it, and somehow his honesty made it hurt less. "You're right," he said quietly. "I was a coward. I am a coward." "Then prove you're not. Prove that this time is different." Chapter 12. Second Chances. 6 months later, Soo-jin stood in the same conference room where she and Ji-hoon had first reunited, but everything had changed. The Kang Corporation wellness program had become a model for other companies, and her clinic had expanded to include 3 new locations across Seoul. More importantly, she and Ji-hoon had found their way back to each other, slowly, carefully, with the kind of deliberate intention that came from understanding how precious and fragile love could be. "The board is impressed with the program's success," Ji-hoon said, reviewing the quarterly reports spread across the conference table. "Employee satisfaction is up 30%, sick days are down, and productivity has increased across all departments." "It's amazing what happens when people feel supported," Soo-jin replied, unable to keep the smile from her voice. They'd maintained professional boundaries during business hours, but after 6 months of rebuilding trust and navigating the complex dynamics of their relationship, they'd found a rhythm that worked for both of them. "There's something else," Ji-hoon said, setting down the reports and reaching into his jacket pocket. "The board has approved a new initiative." "What kind of initiative?" Instead of answering, he pulled out a small velvet box and set it on the table between them. Soo-jin's breath caught as she realized what it was. "The initiative is called Building a Life Worth Living," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "It's a long-term project that requires a very specific partner, someone who understands that success without love is meaningless, someone who can be my antidote not just to anxiety, but to the emptiness that comes from living a life that looks perfect from the outside but feels hollow within. Ji-hoon, I know I don't deserve a second chance. I know I hurt you in ways that can't be undone. But I also know that I love you more than I love my fear, and I'm finally ready to fight for us the way I should have 5 years ago. He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the afternoon light streaming through the conference room windows. Marry me, Soo-jin. Not because it's convenient or expected, but because I can't imagine building a life worth living without you. Soo-jin looked at the ring, then at the man who had broken her heart, and spent months earning her trust back piece by careful piece. The girl who had loved him 5 years ago would have said yes, immediately. The woman she'd become needed to be sure. Promise me something, she said. Anything. Promise me that when things get difficult, and they will get difficult, you won't run. Promise me that you'll fight for us, even when it's scary, even when it would be easier to live. I promise, he said without hesitation. I promise to choose us every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Soo-jin reached for the ring, and as Ji-hoon slipped it onto her finger, she felt the last of her carefully constructed walls crumble. Sometimes, she thought, the best antidote to a broken heart was the courage to love again. Yes, she said, and watched his face transform with joy. Yes, I'll marry you. Outside the conference room windows, Seoul stretched endlessly toward the horizon, full of possibilities and second chances for those brave enough to reach for them. This emotional journey reminds us that true love isn't just about the initial spark, but about the courage to fight for each other even after mistakes have been made. Ji-hoon's return to Seoul wasn't just about business success, but about learning that some things are worth more than protecting yourself from potential. Soo-jin's decision to give him a second chance shows us that healing is possible when both people are willing to be vulnerable and honest about their past mistakes. Their story proves that sometimes the greatest antidote to heartbreak is not avoiding love, but choosing to love more bravely the second time around. What did you think of Soo-jin's decision to reveal her pregnancy and loss? Do you believe Ji-hoon truly changed, or was he just desperate to win her back? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional K-drama style stories about second chances, healing, and the power of love to transform even the most broken hearts.